I think I'm hot. I've got two mics on, one for the camera, one for you, so I don't have to stand at the podium. Also, I have to say I had a coffee accident at the table this morning, and I know this is being filmed and the camera can zoom in, and this will probably end up on YouTube. So I want it to be clear that I do prepare well for my trips and pack clean clothes, but it just didn't work out that way. I do have a few people I really do want to thank, especially Midtown Inc., of course, and the Coalition for Sound Growth for bringing me here. But I've been treated really so warmly, and we spent hours touring around yesterday with Ann King and Leslie Ann Hurd and others, showing me a lot of your city, and I'm grateful for that, and also grateful for the home Southern hospitality of John and Lucy Scheftel, who welcomed me to the Cedars, and it's nice, you know. Let's just say it beats the Courtyard Marriott, which is my normal place to stay. But I was treated to a delicious meal. I don't think it's available anywhere else, with the slightly worrisome cannibalistic name of Country Captain. But it was fantastic, and I think it was chicken, so I'm grateful for that. And they gave me the rest. I have the recipe right here to bring home to because I really did enjoy it. I have a lot to. Oh, I need my advancer. Thank you very much. Could we bring the lights down if that's all right? I have a lot to tell you today, so I'm going to talk really fast. And I thought kind of long and hard about. I'm handled to a different extent by different people who bring me in to speak, but I did have some lengthy conversations with Anne, and she made me earn this by really thinking about what I wanted to talk to you about. And unfortunately, I hadn't been here before I put this together, so it couldn't be as specific. I don't have pictures of your own community, et cetera. It couldn't be as specific as I might have liked, but I really wanted to try to address in my own way the title that I was given, which is the City Livable Community Revitalization the Smart Growth Way. And I hope that this lecture fulfills that goal. But it has a couple other names that I could give it. Basically, whenever I go to a place, there's a certain amount of stuff that I feel I need to convey, because there's a message of smart growth that I'm spreading around the country, around the world, really, if I can. I have to say, it's very confusing. I'm in Columbus today. Last week I was in Columbia, the country, speaking to the National Association of Realtors. And in fact, my plane yesterday from Atlanta, they made the wise decision of loading Columbus and Columbia next to each other at the same time. So you're lucky I'm here. I'm here today. But there's certain things that I've learned over the years that we're just not doing very well in our cities, that we need to do better. And I try and say those things wherever I go. And then finally, in terms of a framework, so you can understand what how this talk is organized. It's really about 8 different ways of planning, and it's almost in a sense a nonlinear, loose history of how we have planned and do plan our communities, and what we've learned from doing that. So without further ado, so I'm a city planner, which means I do 2 types of work. I work on the improvement of existing places, like South Beach in Miami, where I lived for a decade. And I work on the design of new places, like Kentlands outside of Washington, where I was assistant town architect when I was in school, and now I live not too far from there in the District of Columbia. But I'm also, as Anne suggested, I'm a member of the Congress for New Urbanism. I'm a proud, card-carrying, actually founding member of this organization. And as a new urbanist, what that means is that actually we study the old places. We measure them. How far apart are the curbs? How far apart are the trees? How tall are the buildings? What's their relationship to the street? Where does the parking go? We study these older places in order to do a better job of creating newer places. And new urbanists really try to invent as little as possible. The way we used to plan communities that's worked so well for us over the generations, we know that that's a successful model. And we only change it as much as we need to take advantage of modern conveniences, but we don't let modernity allow us to reinvent the city, which is the error that was made in the second half of the 20th century. This is our book, Suburban Nation, which, is this one also for sale today? Or just, okay, this one's also out back. So there'll be a book signing after this, and I should say this now, and you can decide later, if you enjoy what I have to say and you feel that this is a message that you want to be able to spread yourself, That's why these books were written. There's two of them. I'll be showing you the other one. Suburban Nation just celebrated its 10th anniversary. It sold 100,000 copies. It's called the Smart Growth Bible. It was called, actually, the Urbanist's Bible by the Wall Street Journal. I regret to say that was in an article against urbanists, but by Fred Barnes, who some of you may know. But it's been acknowledged as the most influential book of this movement, and it was created to convince people. It didn't convince Fred Barnes. But if you find this argument compelling and you want to be able to make it yourself, this is the book for you as a tool. So I spent 10 years with my co-authors, Andres Duany and Elizabeth Plater-Zyberk, and I'm here today because I'm willing to travel a lot more than they are. We worked together for a decade, as I said, and they are really the heroes and the founders of this movement. And those of you who have heard, has anyone here heard Andres or Liz speak? Oh, good, so you'll think this is all my stuff. But I've stolen all this from them. But after working with them for a decade and writing the book, it got the attention of the chairman of the National Endowment for the Arts under President Bush, whose name was Dana Gioia. And he hired me to be the director of design at the NEA. And I had the great experience of, I know the mayoral candidates are in the room. The Mayor's Institute on City Design was one of the programs I got to run. And that program, every 2 months, somewhere in America, we bring together 8 mayors, 8 designers. We lock ourselves in a room for 3 days, and we try to solve that city's most pressing urban design problem that the mayor picks. So where do I put my convention center? How do I reconnect to my waterfront? Issues like that, and they would be solved behind these closed doors. You know, no media, no constituents. A lot of things are said in those rooms that can't be discussed publicly, and that's why they're such valuable workshops. Columbus is certainly a city of the size that would be appropriate. So whoever becomes the new mayor, please inquire at the National Endowment for the Arts about participating in this program. I bring it to your attention to encourage you to encourage your mayor to go, but also because I was able then for 4 years, every 2 months, to pick my favorite designers. And by designers, I mean designers, developers, architects, starchitects, because there's 2 different things, architects and starchitects, landscape architects, traffic engineers, preservationists, all the people who come together to make communities. And I would get to pick the best ones from the whole country and got to meet so many of them. And I stole their slides too. So so what I'm presenting to you today is the kind of the best of the best that I've learned from these people as well as from my old colleagues. I'm not going to get into that. There's the Smart Growth Manual, which is in contrast to Suburban Nation. This isn't meant to convince you of anything. It's meant to help you to do it. It is a manual. Every page is just a picture, a caption, an instruction, and a little paragraph. For example, about providing parallel parking along the curb to protect the sidewalk. Simple things like that. But if you add them all up, they tend to be the things that cities get wrong. And there's 148 points that make up the book. So I think particularly if you are somehow related to the creation of community or perhaps judging the creation of community and deciding whether plans that are proposed are actually smart growth, this book would be useful to you. I'm invited, now we're getting into the subject matter, I'm invited to a lot of places through an organization called CEOs for Cities. And CEOs for Cities has as its membership a lot of city leaders, a lot of foundations. They're very well funded because a lot of foundations belong, wealthy individuals, people who really want to see their cities thrive. And they're brought in, CEOs for Cities are brought in essentially to do the programming half of making a city work. How large should my convention center be? What sort of events should I be having to draw people to my community? And the question that they're usually given is, superficially, how can I make my city thrive? Deeper down, what they're being told, particularly by the very wealthy people who often bring them in, like the billionaires from Grand Rapids, how can I keep my children from leaving? How can I keep my grandchildren from leaving this community and wanting to stay here? And so we talk about the stuff that makes cities attract younger people who are the engines of entrepreneurship. The 80% of the millennials decide first where they want to live, and then they look for a job. So it's so much about place and wanting to be in a place. And the things the millennials like are the things that the empty nesters also like, and they're also you want in your community because they have more money to spend, right? As well as families. But a lot of cities are focused now on attracting free-moving millennials, free radicals, millennials and empty nesters. And they bring me in because they've realized that physical design is a huge part of this discussion. You can do all you want in terms of programming. It's like designing a house. Well, I want to have 4 bedrooms, or I want to have 1 bedroom, whatever you've decided, but then how are they arranged? And if things are not arranged properly in relationship to each other, or if you can't create street life, this is an exaggeration. This is a sort of event that in Grand Rapids that CEOs for Cities creates, but that's on a special occasion. But if you can't create this everyday hustle and bustle, that people look to New York or Chicago or other of our larger cities to provide, then you're not necessarily going to attract the groups you want to attract. And that's all about framing the public realm in a way that it is conducive to this sort of activity. And that's my specialty. So I'm going to talk very quickly about 8 ways that we can plan our future. And planning is always about the future. In a sense, the definition of planning is you're looking ahead. And I'm going to talk to you about planning for health, planning by zoning, planning by coding, planning by engineering, planning by and for driving, planning for health now, planning for climate change, and planning for walkability. Very quickly. So planning for health is the formative act of the planning profession. Planners didn't used to exist. There was no one called planners. But at a certain point, people realized that we were suffering because of our proximity and our integration with the dark satanic mills of Europe. So in London and in Manchester and Paris and other cities, people were really sickened by this isn't fog, this is just the dirt and the dust and the fumes coming from having manufacturing mixed in with housing, and the idea of moving out into the country, into the periphery, and separating ourselves from these places was the glorious formative act of the planning profession, because lifespans actually increased by 5 or 10 years in a very limited period of time. And the planners were hailed as heroes, and from then on, they tried to repeat that great victory, essentially by separating everything from everything else. So zoning has become the kind of key activity that planners create and that planners partake in, and zoning means that you lay out different areas on a map, and just as you separated industry from housing, now we're going to separate larger houses from smaller houses, from apartments, we're going to separate medical offices from offices, and we're going to create these large areas on maps. Whenever you see a plan like this, and I see them in every community I go to, all you've essentially guaranteed is what we call a suburban sprawl outcome. Because if you have large areas of single use and very few roads connecting them, you have the model of sprawl, which is a big road. Since there's only one, it has to be big. And then the inability to walk from thing to thing because each thing is so big and far apart from other things. So this model of zoning became really the dominant act of planners for many years. And you see here there's a whole series of professions from home building, from development to home building to lending that have organized themselves around this. So if we were to have put one of these $400,000 houses in the $300,000 cluster, it would have been very difficult to finance, for example. So the whole system of production and finance has now been oriented around this. And of course, there's the other model. And this is the Suburban Nation story. We're telling the story. It's a bit oversimplified, but it's effective, and it's ultimately true, that there are really only 2 ways to build community. And since 8,000 years ago, when we built Jericho, the first non-nomadic human settlement, we've had what's called the neighborhood, and what I call the traditional neighborhood. And the traditional neighborhood is defined, this is Newburyport, Massachusetts, you're actually looking at several neighborhoods, but the traditional neighborhood is defined as being diverse, compact, and walkable. And so you have places to worship, places to work, places to recreate, places to live. Every aspect of daily life is within walking distance. And that's the diversity of the form and the use of the city. It's walkable because there are lots of streets, and every street is small. So we're not concentrating traffic essentially on highways within our community. And it's compact in the sense that if you study any community across the globe, frankly, and across history, they almost all have neighborhoods that are, I'll think about a city we both might know, which is New York. And there's Tribeca and Soho and the East Village and the West Village. And all of these neighborhoods tend to be about a 5-minute walk from edge to center, which means they're a half mile across. And conveniently, the Jeffersonian grid, which marched across this nation is mile squares that are then subdivided again into really four neighborhoods per mile. And then you see when you go to communities, you can often identify individual neighborhoods as that size. So it's a well-established model, but it was not invented. It's something that developed naturally in response to man's needs. And here's a diagram that was done initially in the teens, but then kind of resuscitated by my colleagues Andres and Liz, showing the neighborhood structure with a clear edge, a clear center, a mix of uses, many blocks, many streets, and the idea that it can be accumulated. So one can stand alone as a village, several can come together, or many more as a town, and then when they become vertical and more intensely used, they're a city. And those are the two models. You can see the difference between them. And here's a more recent diagram showing that it's the same stuff, right? The sprawl model on the left has places to go to school and shop and work and recreate, but they're all big and they're all separated and they're connected by only one road, and that road becomes the highway. Whereas the traditional neighborhood, they're organized like confetti. That's so important. So sprawl is easy to analyze and discuss because it's made of very few distinct components. And each one is a monoculture. There are places where you only live, places where you only work. So it isn't just this map I showed you, right? I mean, it's much more intense than that because the areas can be much larger and much further apart from each other. So places where you only live, places where you only work outside of Washington, places where you only shop, the big box zoo, the latest version. And then public institutions, which tend to be supersized because this whole mentality of having bigger things further apart from each other. So you get the high school that you can tell by the sheer size of the parking lot to which no student has ever walked, will ever walk. Busing isn't even efficient because the students of this school are so far flung in these dead-end subdivisions, right, that surround it. This is in South Florida. And then other public institutions like sports fields. This is why we have the soccer mom and the soccer dad in this country. Where were they when I was growing up? Well, I could walk to the one baseball diamond that was in my neighborhood. But now we have 4, 6, 8 together, and you can see that's a street surrounding it that you don't want your kid bicycling on. So everyone has to take their kids everywhere because that's the way we've built our communities. And the one piece of this puzzle that was never properly counted when they did the math was the amount of roads it would take. If we separate everything from everything else on the presupposition of one car per adult and the fact that everyone's going to drive everywhere, then all of a sudden we load up our streets and our highways to an unprecedented degree. And the interstate highway system, which was created for commerce and for vacation travel and for nuclear evacuation, frankly, it's true, has instead become a commuter. It's become a commuter way. I lived in 3 different places on the East Coast where I drove I-95 to get to work, and that's how we live now. So I always tell people, this model, which wasn't something that developed naturally, but was in fact a post-war invention, this single-use sprawl model, you can have it, but understand it's a 2-part deal. And if you want one of these, you have to have the other. And then there's this really strange development where this is like Oscar Mayer. This is just Chevron. Right? This is like Oscar Mayer having an ad where the lady says, "No more hot dogs for me, thanks." Right? I mean, they're advertising to stop using their own product. But the point is, all this momentum we're trying to generate to change our lifestyles to be more sustainable. Well, if she lives here, how is she going to leave the car at home? And what this whole campaign doesn't understand is that we've created a national landscape where this sort of reforming our behavior isn't possible. And so much of America, really the majority of America geographically, is this model and not the neighborhood model anymore. So